Hello, and welcome to our Friday weekly voice chat. We are the Men's Human Rights Discord. We are the semi-official Discord server of the Men's Rights subreddit. This week's topic is defining modern masculinity, and a discussion about what does masculinity mean. And I'm going to be honest and be the first to say, I don't have one solid, steady answer. And this is a debate point that I got into with Sam Cedar, and he was pressing me to give a definition. And my answer now is the same as it was then. I think it's very difficult to assign an exact concrete definition to a concept that's always changing and a concept that's always evolving. I think you can look at some basic general elements of patterns of male behavior and say, well, this is masculinity. And then you can debate, well, how much of it is biological from evolution and testosterone, and how much of it is cultural, and how intertwined are those two things. I will say what I don't like is how feminism has kind of taken it upon itself to not only define what masculinity is, but lecture men in a very condescending way about what toxic masculinity is. And feminists will often say, oh, MRAs only exist to criticize feminism, but we kind of can't ignore the fact that feminists are very, very insistent upon being able to define what masculinity is as if they have some sense of ownership over it. Well, why would feminists have any sense of ownership? Why would feminists have any ownership over what masculinity is? They wouldn't want men explaining to women what it's like being women. That's what they call mansplaining. So then how can the same people who make those complaints do exactly the same thing in reverse? So this is an open conversation to anyone. If you have ideas about what masculinity means or is or should mean or shouldn't mean, this is the time to talk. So the floor is open.
Thank you, Blue. I just want to show you this, which is a Twitter feed from a actual feminist who has basically decided that a lot of the feminist narrative on masculinity in regard to school shootings is actually pretty toxic. And they don't sort of say it like overtly in those terms. They make it more about the left as a whole. But they are pretty much, they've pretty much got the nail on the head, although they do frame it in terms of feminism, of course. For example, they note that a lot of school shooters are very horribly bullied. They come from fatherless homes. I don't remember if they mentioned that school shooters are generally over-medicated, and that they are generally that person who gets shoved to the bottom of the pecking order in school, and everyone beats on them and stuff like that. They probably have mental conditions and things like that. So this is pretty much what feminism means by toxic masculinity, at least one of the types they mean by it. And what this guy's point is, as he goes through the his argument, is that essentially feminism and all these the left wing, he doesn't leave the right wing out. He blames the right wing as well, of course, because everyone shares some of the blame here. But he essentially says that feminism and the left wing and all of that are part of this machine, which is as a byproduct of stamping on men, is creating these school shooters. So by fatherlessness, by whacking men over the head in adverts and comedy shows and all this sort of stuff, just constantly beating on them, they are creating, not deliberately, but they are helping to create these people, who go off and attack schools and attack other soft targets where they know there aren't going to be any people with weapons around, which is something that's like is more noted by the right. Like the left won't usually mention that, but the right will often mention like that these are soft targets where there are like no weapons usually, like schools, churches, that sort of thing. So they, these there are. There's one basically saying is there are multiple sides, multiple angles that need to be addressed when looking at what causes a school shooter or any other kind of mass killer. And I think that one of the major ones is actually how masculinity is treated in not just the media but in public policy, because you see the media really is just the symptoms of what like a deeper problem that's running through all of our society, and this is really the problem that we're here to face as an activist group. We're here to face this problem that is what is happening to masculinity in our society. And of course, masculinity is going to be difficult to define, but I think that's mostly because there are so many competing ideologies trying to define it. So we've had feminism's like definition of masculinity, which tends to talk about how oppressive it is, how privileged it is, how overbearing and toxic it is, and how it has been keeping women down for thousands of years. And if masculinity, didn't exist, then women would rule the world and everything would be wonderful and roses and peonies would sprout from the soil everywhere you looked, and it would just be a paradise. It would be something crazy and amazing and wonderful, a utopia. And of course, what everyone who yearns for utopia forgets is that not only are they watering those flowers with the blood of massive numbers of people, but utopia is a word which means a place which cannot exist. So it is baked right into the word itself. This is not something they can really achieve. And the reasons for that are manifold. But as it's mentioned in that thread, one of the things that feminists always forget is the good things that men do. Like, because they're so tribalistic about gender, they forget that men do good things in the world. Men made all sorts of things that they love, like Twitter, for example. They made the computers, they made the phones, and all that sort of stuff. And of course, many, many women had a role in making these things as well. There are plenty of female programmers and computer technicians, and parts of your phone are likely designed by women now. But overall, throughout the majority of history, men were the society builders and women were the family builders. And so men's role rested atop women's role, and women's role relied on men's role. And so we had this interplay of the two genders where neither of them were really better or worse than the other, and both were important and everybody knew it. That's why we have like statues to heroes and things like that. It's because men are bribed with these statues to be disposable in society, and they're disposable in society because society needs them to be disposable in order to survive in a lot of cases. And that is part of what we have started to ignore as a society, or rather have completely ignored for the last 30, 40, 50 years, is men's role in society outside men's role as aggressors, abusers, antagonists, murderers, and mayhem bringers. So what we are partially about here, and what this podcast today is about, is reclaiming part of that legacy of men as good people, as heroes, as, you know, the people who superheroes actually symbolize, and showing society and saying, look, men are actually 99% wonderful and 1% awful. And we acknowledge that 1% are awful, but we also have to acknowledge that 1% of women are awful. And we have to acknowledge that there are stains on women just as there are good things on men, and vice versa. So it's about re-attaining some sort of social contract between the genders, a new social contract which works in the modern society. And I am not saying that we need to return to some sort of conservative past. I'm not saying that there's any utopia back then either. I'm saying that what we really need is to form a new social contract that works for us here and now. And we really, really need to do that very quickly, because Western society is actually falling apart because of all this culture war nonsense. And I think we really have to come to some sort of agreement very soon. We have to outreach to, like, men have to outreach to women have to outreach to men, and everyone has to join together. We need to stop thinking in terms of race and gender and all this sort of stuff when it comes to factions, not when it comes to, like, social interactions and things like that. We're not trying to get rid of men and women either. We're not trying to say that that's not important. What we're trying to say is that we don't want a war. We don't want a gender war. We don't want a race war. We don't want this nightmare where men are pointing fingers at women and women are pointing fingers at men, and everyone's pointing fingers at each other and saying, it's all your fault. You're the evil one. And the evil one. So, I mean, does anyone else have anything to say on this?
I do. I do. I think that in a way there kind of already is a gender war, and it's, coming to a head, I guess I would say. And it, like, we're at the point now where, there are a bunch of casualties around us, and the casualties happen to be each other, and, prevention of being able to establish, meaningful connections with other human beings. That's basically what that is. But whatever happened to the old kindergarten rule at school, like, do unto others as you would have them do unto you? Like, what went wrong there, But for me, like, I would consider myself semi-traditional. Like, I don't mind the traditional aspects. I just don't want them forced on other people, if that makes any sense.
I'd say.
Yeah, I don't think we should force anything on people. Oh, sorry. What about Taj? You wanted to go?
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say, Maddie, I agree. They're trying to force all of those things on other people to try to resurrect the patriarchy. It would only be a zombie and it would eat us. That's not available anymore, and we don't need it, and I think we wouldn't like it anyway. That it's a matter of giving people dignity to make their own choices for what's best for them, because the circles that I travel in, I mean, I'm here, and I also spend a lot of time in those other spaces, with these people that are supposed to be our adversaries. And I'm comfortable either way, because, I don't intend to force anything on anybody. um, it, it's pointless. It's an irreversible process. It's like making an omelet. If you whisk up a bunch of eggs to make an omelet, those eggs are never going to just be eggs again, and we're never going to just be a patriarchy again. It's not going to happen, at least not without an entire collapse of what we have now, which is not too far off, but that would have to happen first. So, trying to point whole groups of people in the direction of going back to the good old days just wastes everyone's time and just widens the gap between us. It's not going to happen. Make your peace with it, because that's the
I
way it's
think
going to be.
I think honestly, I think it's the fact that we like intrude so much in other people's lives and like what we say that's best for them and what we say, or what society says is the best for them. When really they should figure out, because each couple or each human being are completely individuals, and so they're both individuals at the end of the day, so they both have to come up with a system that's going to work the best for them, and or or for that just individual human being, if they're single. I think the problem is that society is way too concerned with other people's lives, and really they should just be focusing on themselves and what's going on with them, and maybe we would have less issues.
Yeah, it's
Mind your noise on the line, what that has, especially when other
oh,
people
sorry.
are speaking. There's a lot of background noise.
Give me a second. Is that better? Does that sound better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So I think that what we should really do is try and find, uh, first we define what masculinity is, and then we try to find what is the social contract that we are going to like offer the other side. What is this new relationship? Because it has, like as Matt says, we can't force anything on anyone, and we shouldn't be trying to do that. So, I mean, I think that what we should really be doing is saying that, okay, people who want to live by conservative values, go ahead. People who don't, go ahead. What we want is to bridge the gaps between those people so they talk to each other more, because at the moment that isn't really happening. Via censorship and various other means, basically, the left and right of society have, as well as men and women, have sequestered themselves off into little groups, and those groups are now shutting out outsiders. It is mostly on the left at the moment because the media is mostly controlled by the left, and they seem to be filtering the right out. And that seems to be getting worse as time goes on. Hopefully, that's going to improve soon, and we can have more of a conversation, because I don't want either of those two sides to really be able to shut the other out. Never mind for them to actually do it, because when you shut out other people from the conversation and you stop people from talking who have something valid and important to say, all you really do is you end up poisoning your side, and the other side ends up going off into a little hole on their own and getting their minds poisoned as well, because they end up creating spaces which become gradually more and more extreme until they can't even tell that they've become so extreme, because they just think that they are sane and everyone else is nuts. That's the problem with tribalism, really. You're saying everyone else is nuts. Taz, did you have something to say?
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, well, one thing I think we want to be careful to differentiate the left from at least in America, the I guess you would call them neoliberal corporatists, the kind of people that drive things like mainstream media and corporate culture and woke culture. From what I see of the left, a lot of them are very disappointed and bitter about that, and they are like very aggressively rejecting it. And I was like, I don't know if that's going to work because those people have lots of power, but I know they're not happy about it. And I look in places like that for potential allies, just because of the fact that if they're not happy and we're not happy, then maybe we can do something together, or maybe not. But like I say, I travel in those circles pretty frequently, and like I say, I don't have any trouble dealing with those people and communicating with them. I had a talk after one. I can't even keep track of the shootings. It was the one that happened on Sunday a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about it. She was very upset because she was scared to death that everything is falling apart. And I just looked at her and said, well, honestly, what did you expect? Be scared. Yeah. Be a little terrified, but don't be shocked, because we have done this to ourselves, and, it's time now to undo it. We can't undo it by continuing to treat boys and young men the way we do. I mean, I guarantee you that, if you want that kind of stuff to become even more common, keep doing what you're doing. But Ma, you had brought up, for us to define what masculinity ought to be going forward, and then, presenting a negotiable social contract to everyone else. The first question is, I think, if we do figure out what masculinity ought to be for most men, and create a contract, who are we presenting it to? Because I think that there are a lot of interests out there that have they have no incentive to even listen to us. They have no, in other words, until things get bad enough and until they fail often enough, they really have no reason to stop and consider our offer, because they're doing very well doing what they're doing. But there are a lot of people, I think, that would be willing to listen and willing to negotiate with us, and they show up in places that are very surprising. But as far as trying to,
This server, for
fight City
example.
Hall, so to speak, and yeah, exactly. But like I say, my one of the men's groups that I'm involved with, I love them to death, and I've got all the respect in the world, but they just continue to fight City Hall, and make direct challenges to a power structure that has been, invincible since before I was born, right? And I'm like, I just don't think it's going to work. But when I actually just sit and talk one-on-one with people, it really doesn't even matter what their worldview is. I can at least do it so that they can hear me. They might not agree with everything I say, but they hear me out. So, like I said,
I think that one
go ahead.
thing that we shouldn't be tempted to do is to fall into that nihilistic mindset that an awful lot of groups, especially the ones that call themselves black-pilled, like to espouse by saying that Carter, your mic's live. Espouse by saying we should destroy society. We should not destroy society. And in fact, we should be trying to repair society, because society is being destroyed, and all this badness that these people think are reasons to destroy society are in fact, they are in fact uh, evidence of it being destroyed. Guys, please do watch your mics. Don't just turn them on and off randomly, especially if you're in a wind tunnel or something.
Ma, you're right. It would be very unwise to just take the whole thing apart and start over, because we've brought ourselves to a situation where we wouldn't survive that. We're not tough enough to be primitive again. That's over now. So we have to work with what we have, and we have to make sure that we can transition as cultures from where we are now to where we need to be without burning the whole thing to the ground. But as I've said
Exactly.
so
I
many,
mean,
yeah. But I've
if
said this a
anyone,
lot that,
sorry,
that's all right. I've said this a lot. In order to make that happen and make it stick, um, it's going to require vast numbers of people to really be committed and really be responsible and really willing to sacrifice things that they have gotten used to, because like I say, we're challenging a power structure that, man, it's, it's invincible. I mean, it's going to have to be, it's going to have to be re-engineered from the inside out. And right now, I can't, it's very difficult to find anybody actually doing that. I know some people who do, but it's a very small group of people. And, I count you all among them, but we're what, 9 here, you know. And the other group I was thinking about, I've met personally maybe, oh, I don't know, 30 of them. And, they're, like I said, the first problem is those people are supposed to be, our enemy, right? The adversary. So, first things first, it's a matter of bridging that gap and saying we cannot afford to be adversaries anymore. There's nothing anybody can do about it. And everybody's going to have to sacrifice, and it's going to hurt. I'm not going to lie. It hurts me every time I do it, but going to have to do it anyway, or we're going to lose everything. And you're right, Ma. If we cross that line and, everything actually does fall completely apart, I don't, this time I think we won't come out of it. So,
if people want a simulation of what will happen if these people, these nihilists, get their way and society does end, then there's a little game called This War of Mine that you should check out. And I think that's quite probably the most accurate simulation you're ever going to get of that kind of society. And that kind of society is generally followed by the kind of society you get in Papers, Please. So I'm just giving you 2 games here that will give you like a general idea of what happens, because what's happening right now in America is so close to what happened during the Cultural Revolution in China that it is terrifying. We have essentially a student uprising led by crazy authoritarian communists. We have all kinds of things like that. We have, it's very, very similar once you start looking into the details and you start realizing that some of the really crazy people who are unpicking society and who are in quite strong positions of power, I'm talking about the Mary Dailies, the Mary Cosses, those sorts of people. I don't want to name anyone like who's alive right now, so like I'm steering away from that. So those are just the 2 names I'm coming up with. But those sorts of people are the sorts of people you got during the Communist Revolution, propping up the established, like the revolution, basically. And the thing these people don't even realize is that once the revolution is over, the revolutionaries are all marched out into fields and shot, because the new establishment doesn't need revolutionaries. What they want very suddenly and very swiftly is order. And they need it like you need air. So they are not going to let anyone who takes part in the revolution continue as part of the society, because what a revolutionary really is somebody who gets very, very angry at perceived injustices, and or who just wants a fight. And there's a good mix of both in every revolution. There's the people who want to fight, and there's the people who want change. And they are all mixed in there together, and some of them are the same people. And what you're going to end up with is not a free and fair society. What you're going to end up with is China. And China is not a free and fair society. Or you could end up with Nazi Germany. It could go the other way. The revolution could be won by a side that,
Or it could be
it's
Russia.
still an authoritarian side. They just have different ideas. Sorry, gone mad.
It could be Russia too.
I'd like the opportunity to chime in here. That's cool. I would like to circle back to when we were discussing how the media might be influencing, the negative perception of males in the media, or the toxicity around masculinity, or the promotion of toxic masculinity, and how men are so negative, how that could be potentially influencing these instances of violence in society, such as that recent school shooting. I actually just don't know how much of an influence that specifically is playing. It's obviously, might have some level of involvement, but I don't think that's the biggest issue on why these individuals are experiencing such a degradation in their mental health, that not only do they no longer have any sense of self-preservation, that's been entirely been thrown out the window. Like, it's not even like gang violence, where they're still trying to survive. These individuals know they're going to die, and so it's like a suicidal type of thing on top of this incredible homicidal tendency, and then on top of that, just the incredible perverse nature of going, executing children that are, not even teenagers in this most recent instance. So that's pretty unique, I think. And I'm not sure if we can really peg that to, I'm not saying anyone's doing this, but peg that to feminist media, or just the media in general, having, putting out material and content that's so negative. I know that's not what you're saying, but I think we might, I think that certainly might be playing some role. But I do think that there is some wisdom in thinking, a little outside of the box here, and a little more unorthodox about, what's causing. We should be thinking like, what's going on in these individuals' brains at a granular level, because that type of act for probably all of us here is like, it's not even possible for us to do something like that. So what are the mechanisms neurologically that are allowing for this, and how can we begin potentially mediating that to some degree? I just want to chime in here. Something that I've found that, and I'll finish off on this, and this is just an idea that I'm throwing out here, but when I started looking into biohacking, which is probably something all of you are at least vaguely familiar with, or trying to kind of improve different systems in your body, through diet, exercise, sleep, things like that, like improving those biological processes. What I found is that it had a very large influence over the regulation of my mood and being able to like cognitively think, being able to have my brain be firing on all cylinders. When I started to optimize those things, I think that a lot of those concepts are very abstract to people though, and they just simply don't have a mental model on how we can improve those different processes and then what effect that has on the regulation of your mood and your critical thinking and your cognitive state just in general. And so I think these individuals, if we were actually able to study at a granular level what's going on in their brain, I don't think it's just that they have these different there's this different framework that they have where this somehow becomes the right thing to do or acceptable. I think that's one part of it, is the psychological framework that they have, the logical, moral, ethical framework that they have. But I really think the main driver of these acts is some total dysregulation and dysfunction neurologically in their brains. And, I think the conversation is centered around how we can begin getting these people back to a more normalized psychological state. And I do think at least it should be part of the conversation in a speculative type of way is how we, putting exercise and, I think a lot of people just say, oh, go to counseling, but really sitting on a couch and talking with someone, it's not radically changing these parts of your brain that need to be changed. And so the last thing I'll finish off on is what I found is that physical exercise in the morning seems to have a really profound impact. Out of all the other things I do, it was going to a park in the morning, every single morning, pretty much. I take days off here and there, and doing high intensity interval training. After I start, first of all, there's an immediate impact. After I'm done doing that, I notice that my brain is firing on all cylinders. I notice I just feel good. Like I'm in a state of mild ecstasy for a state of time. And then the rest of the day, I'm feeling really good. And then once I started habitually doing that, I started noticing even more improvements in my mood regulation. And I was somebody who was in a horrible psychological state and still at times am. But, taking these steps to improve that has been really significantly changing my outlook on life and things like that. So just wanting to throw that out there on how we could potentially fix these issues in people's brains. It's not going to be as easy as just go and exercise for everyone. But I think, I guess what I'm trying to put out there is maybe we should look into more of the biological issue here, or if that even exists at all. I'm just speculating. I can only go based on anecdotally in my own life, things that I've started to identify and notice. Man, I guess the other thing I did want to touch on, though, was that the bullying that this individual experienced in this most recent shooting was also probably a significant component of why this act occurred. I heard he was bullied for his speech impediment. And for anyone that's been bullied for a physical attribute or something physical, how nightmarish of an experience that can be. So I do also think there has to be this awareness that this type of bullying over physical attributes and your appearance and things like that can cause some really heinous psychological states in people. And I've been there myself, and it was pretty much the darkest time of my life by a landslide. So I don't really hear that being talked about that much in these cases. It's maybe glossed over, but it's just like, these men are so bad, they're so terrible. And it's less so about like everyone else who was involved in shaping that individual to the person that they became. All right. That's all I got.
It is a huge mess of different things, but I don't think it's actually that hard to understand what makes them do these things. So, we can look at all the factors. First is fatherlessness. So they grew up in basically a loveless family almost, because when there's only one parent, there just isn't enough time for you. Like, everybody who's ever had two parents growing up knows that one of those parents generally goes off to work quite long hours to support the family, at least one of them, and that person is generally not around for most of your life as growing up. So that person is fairly tangential to who you are, but that person is still important because they come home in the evenings and they still teach you life lessons and things like that. They free up the other parent quite hugely to look after you and to bring you up and to be there for you and things like that. And so the other parent, usually the dad, is there for you as well, and they're teaching you life lessons that are related to being more outgoing and more independent and things like that. But what I'm getting at here is that this boy lacked those things. He grew up in a family that wasn't really a family so much as it was one parent treading water as fast as they could, just from what I've gathered, which isn't much. But this is typical of school shooters. And what this basically creates in the school shooter is a person who doesn't feel loved, and often there's mental problems that go in there as well. So that can also cause a massive disconnect. What people don't realize is with things like autism, with deafness, or any condition which locks you off from society even a little bit, is you start to feel like an island surrounded by sharks, and you start to feel purposeless. You don't feel any kind of purpose in yourself. You don't feel like the world is really real. And when that world is attacking you constantly, you retreat from it and you retreat from it. But if it doesn't let you retreat, if it keeps pushing and pushing and pushing and doesn't let up, then eventually you're going to lash out at it. And if you don't see any kind of future in yourself, if you don't see any kind of purpose, then your purpose could become making a grand statement, taking away the things that these people who hate you really like, and making them take you seriously. And that, I think, is the hub around which school shooters revolve, because they feed off each other. They are not a community per se, although there have been Reddit communities that have been set up around this, even if they're only edgelords mostly. But this is essentially what the core of what a school shooter is: somebody who has no purpose, seeking a grand purpose, who is lashing out against society and is self-destructive. It's the same sort of impulse a little bit as men who commit suicide by cop, which is a lot more common than you think it is, because there are stats floating around that say that perhaps even half to the majority of police shootings are suicide by cop. So this is kind of the impulse. They don't have the guts really to kill themselves, but they can engage in this grand plan that probably feels, it finally gives them energy and purpose, and it finally gives them something to shoot for. Like, literally, it gives them something that they can do which will make a big impact, and which will get on the news, and which will get their face in every newspaper and every TV screen. And even if they're hated, for these people, being hated is the same as being respected. And so they're going on Wikipedia, they're going to have their entry on Wikipedia, they're going to have their 15 minutes of fame, even if they never get to see it. And for some as well, it might not even be about the consequences. They might not even think about the consequences. They might think, yeah, I'll be the one who goes in there and doesn't get cornered. I'll be the one who gets in and gets out and runs away. They don't really have a plan. They're not very forward thinking, this other kind of shooter. So they decide, it's going to be a revenge spree, and then I'll get out and I'll go on the run or something like that. Or maybe they don't even think that far. So, it is difficult to work your way into these people's heads when, firstly, most of them don't survive because they either get shot or shoot themselves. And second, because the ones who do survive are likely going to, if not lie about their purpose, then either try to exaggerate it or not tell you about it, or they're not reliable, is what I'm saying. You can't really go into their minds and find the thing that set them off. But the thing that set them off isn't going to be one. It's all of the personality type. How about now? Am I right? Type is what I'm saying.
Well, you just keep cutting in and out. You're talking and then you just disappear and then you come back.
Sorry. Please let me know when that happens, because my connection could be a little bit weird. So I don't know if I'm understandable right now, but please let me know if that happens. Did you get most of what I said, at least?
Yeah,
A good amount.
So. Yeah. One thing that you brought up that Carter also kind of touched on is, the effect of the outside world on somebody, struggling to fit in and find a place. We're talking about a pubescent boy or a young man. That's always been a challenge, since we've been human. But now, that external pressure against him, is much more well organized and much more universal. It's everywhere. Carter, you were talking about, even looking at biology and simple things like diet, exercise, and lifestyle. And out of my own experience, looking back, there was a time when I was still married, and I was in my late 30s and early 40s, and I was really doing that. I was taking very good care of myself, and I was sober, and I was exercising and being as engaged as I could possibly be. But I remember looking back on it that I was doing that against a hegemonic culture that still saw me as a potential threat, or an ogre, or a buffoon, or an ineffectual, of some kind or other. And eventually, someone who didn't have my problems would still end up in a place where it's like, what exactly am I doing this for? But for somebody like me, I was suicidal. I was dealing with untreated early childhood trauma, and I was a drunk, and as a guy who was, profoundly alcoholic and still sober for, at that point, it was, 8, 9, 10 years, it just gets to be too much, and the research on the external effect on somebody with an addiction problem of, whether their chances of, ever getting better demonstrate that, the very best of recovery for somebody, for especially a man, still means that, say somebody gets, they're very badly alcoholic and they sober up at the age of 30, like I did, right? Now, putting aside the untreated trauma and all the rest of it, the chances of that person living out the rest of their life without falling victim to the addiction again is very generously, 10 to 12%, right? That's not good, right? That's bad. And if you, again, very generously consider that, one of every 10 people, is actively addicted to a substance, which is, like I said, that's generous, probably more. That's a lot of people, man, even just in the US. And if there, that all has to factor into this new negotiation as well. And our new masculinity is that, if the environment that we're in doesn't change, there won't be enough of us that are okay to account for those that are not. And that's one of those things nobody can do anything about until that environment has changed sufficiently. I have finally, I haven't had a drink since April of 2015, which is nice for me, but, I basically had to just take off my pads and walk off the field in order to make that work. Right. I don't engage in the things that a man in my situation ought to engage in. Right. And the reason I don't is because I know that they will kill me. And at my age, I'm 61, the good news is it would happen pretty fast. Right. The bad news is I'd be dead for a long time. So yeah, you're right. Our ability to be physically and physiologically able, to function well and be okay is very important. But if we're functioning well and being okay in an environment that's entirely poison to us, then there's not much point in doing that. You got to have an incentive to get better. So. I see you talking, but I can't hear you.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you for sharing all that context. I thought that was pretty insightful. It's not the focus of the conversation today, but maybe another conversation. I would like to share more on how physical exercise, particularly certain types of physical exercise like high intensity interval training, might have more of an impact on our neurological state than we currently understand. That's definitely what I found. Yeah, weightlifting and just doing simple running, that has an effect alone. But it's when I really started pushing my body. You hear that term or phrase, build your body, build your mind. I never really understood that. And I don't even think this is what they were getting at when that phrase was first conceptualized. But I genuinely feel like my IQ is changing. The just general level of well-being that I have, the happiness that I have is increasing. And what I found is that, I was definitely using a lot of cannabis in the past, a lot of edible products, and taking a lot of caffeine. And when I started exercising more, I noticed that I just organically and naturally was able to distance myself from that a lot easier, to the point where my consumption has drastically decreased. And the reason is because I just started feeling good.
I too is huge in this. I had a very similar experience.
Okay. And I want to let you jump in, George, and I'm glad you are. But the last thing that I want to finish off on is maybe it's worth at least some of us in this activism investigating that a little more, like what role physical exercise is really playing, like on our endocrine system, our hormonal system, our neurologically, what neurotransmitters are being involved in here. Because I feel high. Like I genuinely feel high. I'll finish off on this for a period of time, and then I feel this afterglow the rest of the day. And that for me now has become like a critical part of my mental health. As somebody who has some really, really struggles with mental health, this is probably something I'll have to do for the rest of my life. It's a part of me being healthy is physically exercising. When I don't, I deteriorate really quickly. So for the people that are particularly vulnerable or have or need to overcompensate, maybe physical exercise potentially could just be a necessary component of their physical health, maybe for a period of time. Because the environment is awful for me. The environment can be complete shit, absolute complete shit. But when I do physical high intensity interval training, it's like the environment can be complete crap, but no matter what, I can't reach those maybe extreme lows. I'll always be content, even being in a shitty situation.
We evolved to exercise. I mean, we evolved to be long distance runners and hunt down our prey. It's called Born to Run, that shows we evolved to basically chase down larger animals and exhaust them to death. So we are quite literally born to run and born to exercise. So I think you're 100% right. Diet and exercise are very linked to mental health.
Here's the thing that maybe why there's also an increase of ADHD amongst, just the human population as a whole, because we're not being active enough. And so society basically is having to adjust to that, because I think people with ADHD possibly, because I think a bunch of they say, that people with, ADHD would have thrived back then in a more primal society. There's a theory out there saying that they would thrive that way. And because distractibility and being very hyper was a very good thing back in the day, because your hunting instincts were supreme and very, very sharp. So having a little bit more of that, because you're hyperactive and all that stuff, gives you an advantage in that sort of thing. So, there's a theory out there that tests that theory out, and definitely, because I have ADHD, physical exercise does play a huge critical role in how my mental well-being is as well.
And look at the crap we have.
Actually physically enhance your brain. We have studies now saying that it can help prevent cognitive decline. In men, it produces testosterone, which is used to create neurosteroids, which improve your mood and make you balance your mood and make it harder for you to fall into a state of depression. There's lots of other factors, like getting enough vitamin D as well. So getting outside the sun helps a lot, as does quite a few other things. So, but yeah, eating right and getting enough exercise, it's crazy how much that improves your health, and it's crazy how few people do it. I mean, I'm guilty of not exercising enough.
But yeah, and I appreciate you sharing all that. Men are human. I think one thing though to keep in mind is that maybe not everyone, needs to be hell-bent on exercising, but definitely for the people that are prone to mental health degradation or, psychological illness and things like that, it seems that physical exercise has a really potent effect, at least anecdotally, for those individuals. I mean, at scale, who knows what it actually would look like, but for the people that are really struggling, I think physical exercise has the potential to have a really significant impact on their mental health. They're experiencing some dysregulation, or something isn't being regulated properly. And I found that physical exercise just helps my brain to feel like it's working in harmony. and firing on all cylinders, and it feels good. Where in the past, I kind of remember just always feeling that level of stillness, even when I wasn't doing physical exercise. But now it's almost like a necessary component for me to feel that calmness and stillness in my life that's conducive to a civil personality.
It doesn't have to be boring either. Like, exercise has this reputation of being really boring, but like physical activity can be really interesting if you push yourself, and if you team activities like sports, and also if you're on your own, you can listen to podcasts and music while you're exercising that can really make it, much better, as long as you don't get into this little habits that I have, at least, of stopping the exercise to go through podcasts and then not restarting the exercise. So yeah, that's a little issue that I have that I need to get through.
So,
I like to think of walking as like going on an adventure. Whenever I go to a new city for the first time, I'll just spend a few hours just kind of walking around, kind of exploring. And in that process, something as simple as walking an hour a day, and this may be sad to say, if you walk an hour a day, you're probably exercising more, significantly more than the average American. Probably the average Brit.
Dancing is also a good form of exercise, because you're getting the heart pumping and you're doing a lot of range of motion as well, so that will help out your
What is?
your joints and everything else. So
What is?
Dancing.
Oh, dancing. Yeah, oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I've found
range of motion is
like
very important, because if you don't have a good range of motion, you can damage your joints. So very repetitive actions, like weightlifting is good, but you don't want to be weightlifting the same way for like every time, all the time. You want as much range as possible. Like there's been studies saying that the best way to exercise is actually the way children exercise, and adults should exercise the same way. So that's like roughish running. Huh? How to what, sorry?
No, I was just asking how do children exercise, but then you started explaining it.
Yeah. Running, jumping, climbing, going all over the place, crawling about, like all this sorts of exercise is very, very good for you, and it really, really helps your muscles and so on, even if you're an adult. So going climbing, martial arts is a very good way of doing it.
I'm sorry. We might be slipping away from our point here. All the things that everyone is describing about the effect of a positive and healthy lifestyle on men is, I think, it's something we would all like for our masculinity to be, because, Carter, what you were saying, I'm betting that, these young guys that ended up, like on a murder suicide rampage, I bet they would hear something like that, and it would sound like an unattainable dream to them because of the world they live in. And I'm saying that because, in a lot of ways, I was like that. In the beginning of this talk, we were talking about how does such a young person get to that place? I lived in that place. I did. My own life was very cheap to me. It was next to worthless. And, by extension, of what value could your life possibly be to me? That's for someone like that, the only encourage them to be healthy and clear-headed and well exercised and well maintained is just a clear-headed, healthy, well maintained monster. you know,
Because
because
yeah,
like,
I hear what you're saying.
you know,
That definitely
so
possibly could be the case. I think
yeah,
they're
so
highly influenced.
but just really quickly,
Sure, yeah, definitely.
the point I'm making is that, you know, we can, and I think we should promote the idea of boys and men, especially young men, you know, to maintain their health and reach for that, you know, very at positive and sustainable lifestyle, but to turn to the rest of the culture and say, we can do this, you know, we can encourage this, and we can make it, you know, part of our masculinity. But if we do and you all don't change, then we're going to quit.
Right. So it sounds like what you were suggesting, or what you're trying to highlight, is that, you know, that understanding or that pursuit, it needs to be pushed at the societal level so that it will trickle down to these individuals that are committing these heinous crimes.
Yeah, because the other side of that coin is the one
Yeah.
that makes it through all that and doesn't, you know, like go nuts and burn their life
Right.
down, and actually, you know, makes it through, and then, you know, become a husband and a father and have position in their community and a career, and then the power structure comes along and just takes it all away. Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
and takes it all away in such a way that he can't even rebuild it effectively. Right?
right.
If that continues, then what can we offer a boy or a young man to say, here is the reason to maintain a healthy lifestyle so that you can become a success and, you know, have standing in your community, be respected, just to have a goon come along and take it all away from you?
Sure. Yeah. Well, one thing that we touched on a minute ago was that we should, or that families should be the ones that are making the decisions for their children. Individual family decisions should really drive how our children are shaped. And I want to share maybe a different perspective on why there might be some wisdom in that. There might be some things that are advantageous about that, but there might be a lot more wisdom in collectively coming together to start to set standards. And that's obviously already happening, right? But like, there's a lot more wisdom sometimes when it's a collective group of people that are all sharing their input and ideas, and then the best ideas reach the top. Obviously, there's potentially a lot of flaws there, but you know, in an ideal scenario, the best of us the people with the best ideas would be the ones that are directing everybody else, because not everybody else is maybe fit or is going to have the best ideas themselves. So I'm struggling to really explain this point properly, but I think sometimes maybe in our system, it's just the best ideas aren't reaching the top. It's not that, you know, democracy and these types of things aren't good frameworks. It's just that right now it's not the best ideas maybe aren't reaching it to the top, or the best people to lead aren't the ones that are leading us.
I have a sort of explanation as to why this is happening, if you want to hear my theory.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Okay, so I've mentioned this before. I prescribe to the theory called political ponerology. And what it basically says, and if you flip through history, it is startling how accurate it looks, that people with dark triad personality disorders, psychopathy, narcissism, are both more driven and more apt at political maneuvering, because they're not afraid of lying. They're not afraid of who they have to hurt to get ahead. And they have this sort of insatiable drive and desire for power and control. And the theory of ponerology essentially says that if you look at something like Nazi Germany, or if you look at something like, we were talking about the Red Guards and the Cultural Revolution in China, and now to a lesser extent, you look at radical, toxic, feminism. these narcissistic, psychopathic personalities, they can recognize each other. And there's a kind of unspoken cooperation for mutual benefit, kind of a symbiosis, if you will. And that's why you see the same kind of buzzwords and lingo emerging from feminist spaces, because it's kind of this way that they communicate with each other and kind of recognize each other and kind of reinforce and echo each other. And so people on Twitter or Reddit or Facebook, they start to see these buzzwords and they start to recognize them. And so they start thinking that it's true. And so what you get is you get a smaller core of disingenuous people who are intentionally spreading disinformation. But because they do it in a coordinated manner, millions of quote unquote regular people end up falling for it and they become brainwashed. And that's why I draw the ire of many MRAs by saying a lot of feminists, even the ones who say very toxic things, are very likely good people at heart who have been brainwashed. They've been lied to. They genuinely believe the lies that they are repeating. They don't understand that they've been manipulated and they've been brainwashed, which is why they perceive an attack of feminism as an attack on themselves and as an attack on equality, because they're manipulated and they're brainwashed. And the reality is the average person is not above average in intelligence. I hate to say that, but it's the truth. And people can be misled. And if you look at Donald Trump and you look at Joe Biden, it's very obvious that the top quality candidates are not reaching the top, as you say, and people are swayed into all kinds of stupidity. I mean, the fact that, if Katrina wants to comment on this, Colombia is actually considering electing a far left guerrilla, former guerrilla fighter, pro-communist. Can't they look across the border in Venezuela and see what a disaster that is? Or Cuba? Or Vietnam? Or North Korea? But no, people still fall for communism these days. They still fall for bad ideas over and over and over again. And narcissistic, manipulative, and disingenuous people take advantage of that, and they prey on that. And that's why I think, I know you were talking more about politics than about feminism, but I think it's kind of a similar process going on.
Colombia's situation is not unusual, to say the least. I guess I'm trying to find a way to explain this. What you say is true. We do have a current issue in Colombia where where one of the people running is a former teen, and that is creating a lot of problems currently. We're seeing a lot of uprisings. A lot of protests are going on currently. There are people in the streets. Some of these protesters are now trying to cut off trade routes on land, which thankfully, it's not a good thing, but to a certain extent, it's not too horrible, because since Colombia is mainly surrounded by the sea, that's a lot of our imports and exports. But a lot of the issue with that is just to do with the fact that such a large poverty rate, we have such a huge population of people who are really surviving, because the wealth distribution is such an incredible gap in that country. And so they're angry and they're upset, and for whatever the reason, they believe that this M19, because he's coming up with supposed budget plans, is going to fix the whole problem, make things economically better, and they are so angry. So currently their anger is getting you.
Do you know, is he former FARC?
So the M19 and the FARC are very similar, but they're completely different. The M19 was a group that was created, I believe, well, obviously M19 stands for April 19th. That's the 19 part of it. I'm not entirely sure what year. I believe they came before the FARC, if I remember right. And they're considered very leftist. They were created with all these liberal idealist ideas, and they were mainly created just because at the time there was an increasing issue of the government versus situation going on with the cartels and drug dealers. And the government was training their soldiers to take care of things. There were just too many deaths at hand. And on top of that, they were finding out many government officials were getting killed off or being paid off. And they sort of took things in their own hands. They were very pro-democracy. So they aren't the FARC. They're technically a separate group, but some people could say they're similar, but they're completely different groups. But you aren't wrong. Their anger is getting taken advantage of currently. It's a sensitive situation. It's a sensitive country. I'm only 20 years old, and I was alive to see the peace treaty signed. So it's not been very far since that whole situation was slightly resolved. But they are being taken advantage of currently, which isn't something unusual for most countries.
Hey, watch the background noise, please. Yeah, somebody's in a truck or something. Can they mute their mic, because that's not appropriate.
I muted them. It was blue.
Yeah. But relating that to feminism, getting away from politics, because that's a whole situation. So feminism does, to a certain extent, do a lot of the similar when it comes to using people, obviously in the situation media and politics. The current situation is the anger of the people is being taken advantage of to use against certain candidates. Also, the attempted assassination of this candidate did not help whatsoever. I think when it comes to feminism, there is advantage being taken, but I think it's somewhat involved with politics, but in a different format. In Colombia, it's currently the people and the people's popular vote that's being taken advantage of in anger. In feminism, it's really of the 1%, but the reality is, at least in the US, it seems, that a lot of the power when it comes to voting is in money. And feminism has found a way to make itself so profitable that it is popular to support. And there is nothing wrong with certain ideas on feminism, but the problem is the people who are in charge of this money and the offices that are feminist-based are creating policies and passing laws which are discriminatory towards men, which define masculinity in a manner that is very untrue, to say the least. And to be frankly honest, one of the biggest issues is they don't really define masculinity. They just say toxic masculinity a lot. And they don't truly define that either. You know, some definitions say masculine acts which turn toxic. Others just say masculinity, basically sort of hint that masculinity is toxic in general. And there's never really been a true definition to what is masculine. You know, we were talking about exercise earlier. Some people say exercise makes you masculine. Others can say, you know, I'm just saying stuff. I'm just saying stuff off. Other people can say, you know, just being male and the biological products. It's like, well, if it's only the biological products, I mean, there's nothing toxic about having a penis. You know, and so we've come to a situation where we have the word toxic masculinity floating in the world, and we don't really know what it means because we don't really know what masculinity is. Because people will refer to masculinity as maybe things in the past, talking about the guy in the household, guy is the head of it, he has to work for everything, you know, and gender roles. But gender roles are changing so much in the modern world because we can no longer afford to stick by traditional gender roles. We've gotten to a point in the world, and this is one of my problems too with the whole wage gap theory, which has already been debunked, God knows a million times, is a lot of these countries claiming wage gap issues, you know, and discrimination in the workplace, it's sort of hard to believe because everyone has to work nowadays. Because we've gotten to a point where economy is bad worldwide that you cannot afford to live. It's almost impossible to afford to live in a household where only one person is working. And also, I think values are changing too. This is something I sort of want to bring up. Jordan Peterson is very popular at MRA, and I think he's popular more to the mainstream. And I'm not saying the men's rights movement isn't, but you know, most people haven't heard maybe about NCFM, which is National Coalition for Men, right away. They haven't heard about Elizabeth Hobson right away, or anybody else we could really name in here. But many people have heard the name Jordan Peterson. And I think it's because he's bringing up something that's also coming in the modern day, which is the idea of self-validation, which is something that wasn't spoken before and is sort of molding with new masculinity. Before, you know, there's this whole thing, validation through women and men, and they had to validate each other. And obviously, as toxic starts taking over and we see the effects of it, you have people like Jordan Peterson who are talking about this need for self-validation and people starting to listen and taking his tips and starting to self-validate. And so that just seems to be one of, at least to me, one of the big steps, because I've known so many people who've never heard of the MRM, but they will know Jordan Peterson because they've listened to all his content. And they will know about self-validation, and they talk about how self-validation has helped them build who they are as a person. It's helped them out in life. You know, it's made them more confident. It's helped them in interviews. It's helped them keep life more organized. So that's something I think goes with modern masculinity. But if anyone wants to jump in at any point.
No, I don't think he's necessarily an MRA, but he does have a little bit of crossover with us, and
yeah, he doesn't recognize
does
as one,
seem
but
to,
he sort of, in a
speak
way,
to a lot
got
of young
called
men.
one because people don't like his ideas.
Yeah, they also call him far to the right and a supremacist and all that sort of stuff, and they've like put his, like they've tried to associate him with like the Red Skull from, who's like, you know, in the Marvel comics and stuff like that. It's kind of very interesting that he tries to help men, and he automatically becomes the worst person in the universe.
Yeah, I
It's
think
very
the only thing he's guilty of is being like immune to the feminist tribalism and just devolving into that groupthink. He just speaks what's on his mind in these interviews, and it doesn't, you know, in some instances it aligns with, you know, what men's rights activists are saying. But he's immune to a lot of types of tribalism. Like the reason he probably doesn't identify as an MRA or as a feminist and things like that is because he doesn't want to tie himself to something like that. And I do think there's a lot of wisdom in that, is not maybe aligning yourself with a group in that type of intimate way, where it becomes very easy to fall victim to groupthink and just, you know, going along with an agenda. And I think just I can identify that the flaws in associated, you know, with groups like that or that tribalistic thinking.
I think the reason why, like Jordan Peterson doesn't like really consider himself an MRA is because there's a bunch of like toxic ones out there. I think it's because he doesn't want to be associated with, the pickup artists of the world. The really, really toxic ones that are like super misogynistic. I think I think that that's also another reason why is because there's this like podcasting, thing called Fresh and Fit. Yeah, that he doesn't want to be associated with those things because they talk about men's
Right.
issues at the same time, they talk about them in such a negative way where, women are the problem and not, where that's going to be an issue. And yes, we do address, how that women can be toxic, women can be abusive, women can be, just overall not not the best human beings. However, they don't address their own toxicity in their own movements, and I think that's why Jordan Peterson has a hard time associating himself to being a men's rights advocate, but he also doesn't want to be associated with feminism either. He's kind of like in the middle type of thing.
Yeah. Well, I reject
You're
the idea
cutting in and out.
that pick up art issues, but they are certainly not associated with our community. And I don't think that it's good to put them and us in the same breath, even if they might have listened to one of them. So I wouldn't know.
But it's one of the flaws of it's one of the flaws of identifying as a group, though. Like that happens with feminists as well. There's we have a lot of critique of feminists, and then they say, well, those aren't real feminists, or those aren't that's not how I think. That's not what real feminism is about. And then the same type of criticism is being levied at MRAs. The thing is I don't agree with, if everything that the MRA mainstream is putting out.
Really fast, though, on that point, really fast. The difference is the feminists who they say, oh, well, those aren't real feminists. Those are the feminists, though, that are part of the major organizations. Those are the feminists who are invited to speak at the Women's March. Those are the feminists who are the blue checks on Twitter. So the difference is the crazy MRAs are not the ones who are the mainstream MRAs, whereas the feminists who say these toxic things, they're the ones who are part of the mainstream organizations. They're the ones who lobby politicians. Some of them are elected by politicians. So it's not an equal argument.
I hear what you're saying, and I think that's an important point that you're bringing up. But all I'm putting out there is, as I've gotten older, and as I guess I believe I'm going, continuously going through some type of maturation. In that process, I've started to not identify with groups at all. Like, I'm just an individual person who has individual thoughts, and I'm not going to be bound to anything, So maybe in certain instances where it's an absolute necessity, and then I disband from it to further some type of pursuit or goal. But I do think that there maybe more critical thought should be put around identifying with a specific group, because that's a very powerful thing, and it's not really clear, or it's very easy. It's a lot of the process is subconscious in how you start thinking differently when you align with a group, and how it makes it really easy to fall into a groupthink type of mentality on things where you're not actually critically thinking through the position. You're just going with what your group thinks. That's probably why they call it groupthink.
Well, here's the thing. Another thing, like, any movement that gets started will have those outliers or those outsiders that will give that same movement a very, very bad name. But here's the thing, like feminist movements, there are definitely ones that give it a bad name. MRA movements, there are ones out there that definitely give those a bad name. It is finding, the people that have a healthy, scope of reality and realizing like what society is now, that those are the ones that are actually going to give those are the ones that are actually going to make a difference in the world. And we should stop listening to the toxic ones and start actually focusing on the real ones that are actually going to start making change throughout the world.
Right. But even at that, if we differentiate ourselves from, like the pickup artist community, red pillars, even the real diehard followers of Jordan Peterson, then it was like all we're doing then is saying this is what we are not, But going back to the beginning of the discussion, I still think it's very important that collectively, sorry for the expression, but as a group, we have to clarify. Yeah, we have to say that is what we are not, but this is what we are. This is what we do believe. This is what we do promote.
The red pill, the pickup artist community does not represent the overall values of the men's rights community.
No, but again, that's only saying what we are not. And it's a whole lot more difficult for people to listen when we say, but this is what we are. You guys all, for those of you that do know me, you certainly know that I am no pickup artist. I am very far from that, and I am certainly not a red pillar. I don't pursue, anything that those folks promote. Also, I'm not entirely convinced by following even folks like Jordan Peterson, only because, I love the guy like a brother. Believe me, I really do. And I've got a lot of respect for him, but I still have this nagging intuition that while he's promoting and supporting and validating young men, he just has a hard time seeing that he's also painting a huge bullseye on their forehead. He's telling them to square your shoulders and, comb your hair back and clean your room and face the world squarely. But he never makes it quite clear that, and by the way, when you do that, you run a higher risk of having somebody come along and take everything away from you. And until I hear that from him, I'm probably not going to be, out there touting Jordan Peterson either. If he says that out loud in front of people and says, look, I want for you all to be valid and supported and have your place in society. But first things first, let's shut down this power structure that comes along and rips everything away from you. Yeah?
Yeah, I think we do need to shut that down, but I do think these are two parts of one whole, where I think that we have to get men to back into a position, rehabilitate men, and also rehabilitate women and rehabilitate our social structures at the same time. I don't think this is something we can do one thing at a time, because it's going to take generations. This society has fallen apart so quickly that I don't think most people even realize that it's falling apart, thinking that things are just going to keep, things are going to pick back up. And
yeah, you were kind of cutting in and out there a little bit more at the end, so we didn't get that last statement. Yeah, we still can't hear you for some reason, but no worries. Okay.
Guess take us out for today, guys. Hopefully next week we'll have a lot less issues with internet and mics.
Right.
Okay. Well, thank you guys for coming. This has been the Men Human Rights Server. We are here every Friday at 4 p.m. UK time, 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern. We always love having you guys here. It's been an amazing conversation. Always love hearing what you guys. If you ever have a topic recommendation, you can message Men Are Human, Blue, self. And I hope you guys have a good week. We'll see you guys next week.